Peaceful organisation. They're not terrorists.
And you're a doctor.
I am indeed.
Do you think it's appropriate they're being arrested for this action?
Well, I'm thinking about all the medical staff, the medical facilities in Gaza that have been destroyed by the...
But I've told you, if you continue to walk back into the procession, you'll be prevented from doing so to prevent offences occurring.
Yeah, but you only arrest on offence.
The police started moving people up the street, and then suddenly they dived on a couple of people in the crowd. Wasn't clear to us what sparked that off.
His supporters once hailed him as a man of principle, a steady hand in chaotic times, the figure who would restore Britain's honour after years of turbulence. But look closer now and the image crumbles. Every principle he once claimed has been bartered away like loose change. Keir Starmer promised fairness, promised compassion, promised a Britain built on trust. Yet what he delivers is deception dressed as duty, betrayal wrapped in the language of pragmatism. He does not stand as the saviour of trust, but as its gravedigger, lowering the hopes of a weary nation into the same ground where countless broken pledges already lie. And that is the truth his speeches cannot hide, the truth his careful words cannot disguise. The chaos never ended. It simply put on a new mask. From the moment he rose to power, the script has been familiar. He walks onto the stage with deliberate calm, his tone steady, his delivery measured. He speaks as though his words carry the weight of reason, as though Britain can finally breathe under his control. But listen closely and the illusion fades. His promises sound strong, but they are hollow. His pledges seem bold, but they dissolve at the first sign of pressure. On immigration, the issue that has haunted British politics for decades, his contradictions are laid bare for all to see. He insists he will restore order, yet the policies he unveils create more anger, more resentment, more confusion. He vows to deliver compassion, yet the measures he outlines treat human beings as pawns in a game of political survival. The Rwanda plan was the first to fall, dismissed as unworkable and inhumane. For a moment, some dared to hope that scrapping it meant a new beginning, a break from cruelty disguised as policy. But what came after was no improvement. Instead of flights to Africa, he now promises detention at home. Instead of exporting desperation, he imports it into Britain's own overcrowded facilities. The so-called deals with France, transactional, fragile, dependent entirely on goodwill that cannot be guaranteed, expose the weakness of his strategy. He speaks of toughness, yet he leaves Britain beholden to others. He speaks of clarity, yet his policies spiral into contradiction. And for a leader who once prided himself on restoring the nation's credibility abroad, the spectacle is humiliating. This is not the leader people were promised. They were told he was different, that his word meant something, that his vision was guided by conviction rather than calculation. But now the portrait that emerges is one of a tactician without principle, a politician who bends and shifts with every gust of political pressure. On Brexit, his stance shifted. On spending, his pledges were diluted. On nationalisation, his commitments were quietly abandoned. And now on immigration, the mask is slipping faster than ever. To those who wanted a strong hand on the tiller, he looks weak. To those who demanded compassion, he looks cruel. To the undecided, he looks like what they feared most, another politician saying one thing and doing another. Critics describe him not as a leader, but as a manager of appearances. They say he speaks of asylum seekers as case files, of migrants as statistics, of borders as stage props in his endless performance. He promises efficiency, but the asylum backlog festers. He promises fairness, but families are left in limbo. He promises compassion, but his language drips with suspicion. Each time he opens his mouth, the gap between word and deed grows wider, and with it, the trust of the nation grows thinner. His infamous phrase, warning Britain must not become an island of strangers, was the crack that split the facade. Even after his apology, the damage endured. To many, it was not a slip of the tongue, but a glimpse of his instincts when the mask falls. Even his own party has begun to show unease. Labour MPs, once loyal, now murmur about betrayal. They remember his pledges to protect refugees, his speeches about compassion, his vows that Labour would stand against cruelty. Yet now they sit in silence, watching as their leader delivers policies that echo the very rhetoric Labour once opposed. Their silence in the Commons is not unity. It is discomfort, brittle and uneasy, a silence that tells the country more than applause ever could. Outside the chamber, ordinary citizens see it too, and they read it as complicity. In pubs, in town halls, in workplaces, the mood is sour. People mutter that they have heard this all before. Leaders promising strength, promising control, promising an end to the crisis, only to leave the country deeper in the same mess. Nigel Farage thunders of betrayal. Humanitarian groups warn of cruelty. Commentators write of drift and disillusionment. And their words stick, not because they are new, but because they sound achingly familiar. The promises have changed, the faces have changed, but the story has not. That Starmer was supposed to be the man who ended the chaos. Instead, he risks becoming just another chapter in its endless cycle. And so the suspense grows, not because people believe in his promises, but because they are waiting for them to collapse. Each speech feels like a test, each announcement like a fragile construct that could crumble at any moment. Will he tighten his grip, or will the contradictions tear it all apart? Will he steady the ship, or will it sink under the weight of mistrust? The tension hums beneath every headline, a background note of dread and inevitability. Britain waits, weary yet watchful, knowing the reckoning is not far away. The longer Starmer speaks, the more the contradictions tighten around him like chains. He tells Britain he is committed to fairness, yet fairness never arrives. He insists that his policies are rooted in compassion, yet compassion is the quality most absent from the reality they create. He claims to be restoring trust, yet every shift in position, every broken pledge, every carefully worded retreat eats away at that very trust he pretends to guard. The irony is brutal. The man who promised to steady the nation has instead left it balanced on a knife's edge, uncertain of where he stands and deeply suspicious of whether he stands for anything at all. Nowhere is this suspicion clearer than in the matter of immigration. For years, the debate has swung violently between extremes, a pendulum of politics that never finds rest. Starmer vowed to break the cycle, to take the heat out of the debate. But instead of cooling the fire, he has poured fuel onto it. His words promise control, yet they breed resentment. His policies claim balance, yet they spark outrage on all sides. To the hardliners, he is weak. To humanitarians, he is ruthless. To the majority in the middle, he is unconvincing, a leader who cannot decide who he is or what he believes. And still he steps onto the stage, repeating his mantras. He speaks of smashing gangs, of securing borders, of fairness and firmness. But each phrase lands differently now. Each promise is heard against the background of his broken record. The audience no longer listens for what he says. They listen for the silence that follows, the hollow space where action should be, where conviction should live. His words echo, but they do not endure. They linger only as reminders of the trust already squandered. The deals he boasts of with France are the clearest symbol of this hollowness. He presents them as triumphs, as proof that Britain is once again working hand in hand with allies. Yet critics see only dependency, a country tethered to fragile agreements that could unravel with a single shift in Paris or Brussels. Britain is promised control, but in practice it is bound to the will of others. Starmer promised sovereignty restored, yet he delivers sovereignty borrowed, rented, and always conditional. For a leader who prided himself on strength abroad, the image is pitiful. A prime minister who appears less like a statesman and more like a supplicant, forever asking for permission, forever negotiating from weakness. And within Britain itself, the promises collapse further. The detention centres he speaks of are already stretched beyond breaking. The system he vows to make faster is paralysed by years of backlog. The resources he claims to mobilise are nowhere to be in. Families remain stranded in limbo. Children grow up under the shadow of uncertainty. Communities are told to accept new arrivals without being given the means to support integration. Instead of stability, Starmer's policies create perpetual crisis, each solution breeding another problem, each announcement exposing another failure. The cycle repeats endlessly, a grim echo of the very chaos he swore to end. His defenders plead that he is being pragmatic, that he must balance ideals with reality, that he is navigating the most difficult of issues. But critics hear only excuses. Pragmatism without principle is not leadership, it is slothful. Balance without conviction is not strength, it is drift. And survival drift, endless calculation. These are the hallmarks of Keir Starmer's leadership. The man who once stood before the nation promising clarity and conviction now looks less like a leader and more like a tactician lost in his own web of compromises. Even in his own party, the atmosphere grows more brittle. The promises of renewal have turned into whispers of betrayal. MPs who once cheered his rise now admit privately that the man they supported is not the man who governs. They remember the pledges he made to them, the values he invoked, the compassion he swore to embody. They remember the speeches in which he condemned the cruelty of the Conservatives and vowed to chart a different course. Those memories hang heavy now because they stand as proof of how far he has strayed. Within the Labour benches, silence reigns, not supportive, not celebratory, but uneasy, resentful, and filled with the unspoken truth that their leader has abandoned the very ideals that carried him to power. And outside the chamber, the public mood hardens. In villages, in cities, in pubs, and on high streets, people speak of being deceived yet again. They mutter that Starmer is no different, that his words carry no more weight than those who came before him. They recall how often they have been told that immigration is finally under control, that fairness is finally being restored, that compassion is finally being balanced with order. They recall every promise, every failure, every disappointment. And so when Starmer speaks, they do not hear hope. They hear an echo, the sound of betrayal, repeated once more. This is why the suspense grows with every passing week. Britain waits, weary and watchful, for the inevitable collapse. Every new policy is greeted with scepticism, every speech dissected for signs of weakness, every announcement met with the question, what will be broken next? It is the rhythm of a country that no longer trusts its leader, that no longer believes in the words of the man at the podium. Suspicion has become the background noise of British politics, and with each move, Starmer deepens it. He wanted to be the man who ended the chaos, but to his critics, he is simply the latest actor in a theatre of mistrust, another face performing the same tired play. And yet, beneath the mistrust, another fear grows. A fear that Britain is drifting not just into disappointment, but into something darker. For when promises collapse and trust evaporates, what fills the void? Division, anger, suspicion. The ground is shifting beneath Starmer's feet, and though he tries to walk with composure, the cracks spread wider with every step. Britain has seen this play before, and it knows how it ends. The only suspense left is not whether it will collapse, but when. The question of trust now overshadows everything. Can Keir Starmer be trusted to say what he means and mean what he says? His supporters may try to defend him, but the record speaks louder than any defence. From his shifting stance on Brexit to his abandoned pledges on public spending, from the promises of nationalisation quietly dissolved to his reverse commitments on freedom of movement, each step paints the same picture, a leader not of conviction, but of calculation. And when calculation defines leadership, trust dies. Immigration has become the sharpest blade cutting into his credibility, because here the gap between word and deed is not theoretical, but visible. Painful, undeniable. He talks of restoring order, of smashing criminal gangs, of creating a system that is faster, tougher, fairer. Yet the reality is a patchwork of compromises, sound bites, and fragile deals that collapse under scrutiny. To those demanding tougher enforcement, he appears weak. To defenders of human rights, he appears cruel. And to those who once believed he could steady Britain, he appears empty. This is the paradox that stalks him. Every attempt to appease one side alienates another, and in trying to walk the line between conviction and compromise, he satisfies no one. What Britain sees is not strength, but drift, a leader standing at a crossroads, yet unable to choose a path. His words sound rehearsed, his tone calculated, but beneath the surface there is no clarity, no vision, no conviction. Immigration has become not a challenge to be solved, but a stage upon which he performs, repeating lines that convince fewer and fewer each time they are spoken. And with every performance, the critics grow louder, the suspicion deeper, the trust weaker. It is not just the domestic audience that watches with unease. Abroad too, Britain's credibility wavers. Allies look on and see a country torn between humanitarian obligations and political posturing. A government that speaks of cooperation while clinging to fragile deals. A leader who claims moral authority while betraying it in practice. Starmer insists that Britain will remain bound to the European Convention on Human Rights. Yet in the same breath, he hints at limiting its influence. He proclaims a commitment to international cooperation, yet unveils policies that look transactional, shallow and temporary. For other nations, the image is not of leadership, but of confusion. A Britain that once held itself as a beacon, now reduced to a flicker. And while governments may measure credibility in treaties and negotiations, ordinary people measure it in human lives. Behind the speeches and sound bites, the cost of his contradictions is borne by families trapped in limbo. Children raised in uncertainty, communities taught to see newcomers as burdens rather than neighbours. Starmer insists he is balancing compassion with control, but the reality is neither compassion nor control. It is paralysis. A system that leaves asylum seekers stranded, that forces local councils into crisis, that creates resentment not because of migration itself, but because of the chaos with which it is managed. Critics argue this is not leadership, but survival, not vision, but fear. Each new announcement feels less like a solution and more like an attempt to buy time, to keep headlines at bay for another day, another week, another cycle of politics. There is no long-term plan, no strategy to integrate, no serious commitment to rebuild a broken system. There are only half measures, hurried compromises and policies designed to appear tough while avoiding the hard truths. Britain is not moving forward, it is treading water, its leader flailing quietly beneath the surface while insisting that all is calm. And yet, even as the cracks widen, Starmer clings to the mask of composure. He insists the system will be fairer. He insists Britain will regain control. He insists he is steering the nation to stability. But each insistence carries less weight than the last because trust, once broken, cannot be repaired with repetition. The audience grows restless. They lean forward, not with belief, but with expectations. The expectation of collapse. They have seen this play before and they know how it ends. Within Labour, unease deepens. Some MPs speak of betrayal, others of dishonour. The private conversations are filled with regret, with recognition that the leader they supported is not the leader now in power. They speak of values abandoned, of pledges dissolved, of promises twisted into something unrecognisable. And beyond Westminster, the murmurs grow louder still. Nigel Farage seizes on every contradiction, thundering that Starmer deceives the people, pretending toughness while appeasing Brussels. Humanitarian groups decry the erosion of compassion, warning that Britain is surrendering the values that once defined it. Commentators describe a leader out of step with his role, a man who treats crises as performances rather than responsibilities. And so voices from across the spectrum converge on a single theme: mistrust. Not only mistrust in his policies, but mistrust in his character, in his capacity to lead, in his ability to stand for anything beyond his own survival. It is a mistrust that transcends ideology, uniting critics who otherwise would never share common ground. And that perhaps is the most damning sign of all. The suspense builds chapter by chapter, like a novel approaching its climax. Each announcement is greeted not with hope, but with scepticism. Each policy scrutinised for the contradictions it hides. Each speech dissected for the gap between words and deeds. The audience waits, weary, expectant, suspicious. for the moment when the performance can no longer hold? Will the promises collapse under their own contradictions? Will the public, tired of betrayal, finally turn away? Or will the cycle continue, dragging Britain deeper into the same weary spiral? For critics, the ending is already clear. They see Starmer's immigration policies not as solutions, but as symptoms, not as acts of leadership, but as evidence of drift. They see not conviction, but calculation, not vision, but survival. And they warn that the price will not only be paid by Starmer himself, but by Britain as a whole. A nation that trusted him to heal the wounds of politics, only to find the wounds reopened deeper than before. The sense of betrayal now runs deeper than party lines, deeper than policy debates, deeper even than politics itself. It has become a question of identity, of what kind of nation Britain is and what kind of leader it deserves. Starmer promised to unite, yet his words divide. He vowed to heal, yet his policies wound. He claimed to restore trust, yet every decision he makes erodes it further. For many, it is not just that he has failed to deliver. It is that he has delivered the opposite of what he promised. And in that reversal lies the sharpest sting of all. Critics warn that Britain stands at a crossroads. One path leads to renewal, a future where immigration is managed with compassion and foresight, where integration is not an afterthought but a priority, where the nation reclaims its role as a beacon of fairness and opportunity. The other path, they argue, is the one Starmer has chosen, a future of suspicion, where migrants are problems to be managed, asylum seekers are threats to be neutralised, and every policy is a calculation designed to appease headlines rather than to serve humanity. It is a path not of strength but of fear, not of leadership but of drift, and it is a path that breeds resentment at home and scepticism abroad. This is why the stakes feel so high, why the atmosphere feels like a novel teetering on its final pages. Every new announcement is not merely policy, but theatre, not governance, but performance. The audience waits with bated breath, but not out of hope, out of dread. They wonder when the next promise will shatter, when the next pledge will be reversed, when the next mask will fall. Suspense has become the background music of Britain's politics. A low hum of uncertainty that touches every debate, every headline, every conversation. And what of the people caught in the middle of this performance? Families fleeing persecution, trapped in bureaucratic limbo, children growing up in temporary accommodation, their futures stalled before they have even begun. Communities left divided, their goodwill eroded by years of mistrust. These are not case numbers or bargaining chips, they are lives. Yet under Starmer's watch, they are treated as statistics in a political game, as tools for speeches, as burdens to be shuffled from one policy to the next. Critics argue that this is the ultimate betrayal, not simply of promises, but of people. The symbolic weight of his words still lingers. His warning that Britain must not become an island of strangers cannot be erased by apologies or clarifications. It struck a nerve because it echoed fears long buried in the national consciousness, fears of identity lost, of belonging questioned, of home turned hostile. For a leader who built his image on unity, the choice of such language was devastating. It shattered the illusion of compassion, replacing it with suspicion. To his critics, it revealed his instincts unmasked in a moment of carelessness. And even now, long after the apology, the phrase hangs over him like a shadow. He cannot escape. Opponents thunder that Britain is losing itself. Farage seizes the moment to rail against betrayal. Humanitarian groups sound the alarm over compassion abandoned. Labour's own critics whisper of dishonour. Constitutional voices hint at damage to the moral fabric of the nation. Each of these voices may differ in tone, in motivation, in ideology, but together they converge on one damning theme. Mistrust. They do not trust his words. They do not trust his promises. They do not trust his vision. This mistrust is more dangerous than any single policy failure because it seeps into the very relationship between the governed and the governing. When trust dies, democracy falters, and Britain already weary from years of broken promises, cannot afford another leader who feeds the cycle of cynicism. Starmer, once billed as the antidote to chaos, risks becoming the latest author of its continuation. The tension builds, sharper, now closer to breaking point. Each policy is greeted not with faith, but with suspicion. Each speech not with respect, but with scepticism. The country waits, watching, knowing that something must give. Will the public finally tire of the performance and turn away? Will the contradictions collapse under their own weight, or will the cycle drag on, carrying Britain deeper into division, deeper into mistrust, deeper into disillusionment? The questions hang heavy, unanswered, and in their silence, the suspense only grows. For critics, the conclusion is already written. Starmer's immigration policies are not solutions, but symbols. Symbols of betrayal, of drift, of promises broken. They reveal a leader who says one thing and does another, who pledges compassion but delivers suspicion, who promises control but deepens chaos. They expose not vision but survival, not conviction but calculation. And in the end, they warn, this betrayal may cost more than his credibility. It may cost Britain the fragile trust of a nation that has already been let down too many times. And so the story closes not with resolution, but with foreboding. Britain stands in suspense, its faith tested, its patience stretched, its hope drained. The mask of decency has slipped, and beneath it lies a truth that cannot be ignored. Keir Starmer is not the man who will heal the wounds of a weary nation. To its critics, he is the wound itself, the living embodiment of betrayal. And that betrayal, they fear, is the shadow under which Britain now walks, uncertain, mistrustful, and waiting for the reckoning that must surely come.